Hi, thanks for tuning in today to another Front Porch Conversation here at Advent Christian Village. We're on the porch at the Copeland Community Center this morning, and we hear all kinds of sounds from nature and other things around us, but what we're really looking forward to is hearing from Barbara and Paul Bertolino. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
We're glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. Why don't you tell our viewers where you were born and where you grew up for each of you?
I was born in Andover, Massachusetts, but I grew up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and I was there until my late 40s, so I spent a lot of my life in Massachusetts.
I was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and remained there until age 55.
And did the two of you know each other during that time?
Eventually. We ended up in the same church in the 70s.
We met in church.
Late 60s, yeah.
What are some fond memories of your youth and growing up?
I think for me, my best memories were my teenage years, even though that was the 60s and it was a very turbulent time. I had become a Christian and I was involved in a youth group ministry all during my teen years. So I think that gave me a lot of satisfaction. It certainly helped me to be able to share my faith and to grow in my faith. And I think that's the time that I remember the most fondly. I didn't come from a Christian home, so that was my upbringing in the church.
Yeah, I have fond memories of growing up on Front Street in Haverhill, Massachusetts, a street that has produced 3 Advent Christian pastors. And it was just a warm family community there with a school and playground. And everybody was your grandmother or uncle, and it was just fond memories. And at age 19, I did leave to go cross country.
And do our viewers know who those other pastors are? The Advent Christian pastors?
Probably so.
What? Do you want to tell us?
Ray Penny, for one. I'm the one that knows Ray Penny the longest of anybody in the village. And Jerry
Hardy.
Jerry Hardy, who's in Pittsfield, New Hampshire. And he was the result of some of our work we did at the Haverhill Church. And he eventually went to Berkshire. And we were glad to see another Advent Christian pastor.
And who was the third?
Me.
Gotcha.
Oh my gosh, who would have thought? When you met, you were about what ages?
I was 20.
And let's see, I was in my early 30s. Yeah, I was moving right along. We met at the same church, and eventually I led that gospel team, which started with just 3, Barbara, a pianist, and a young Italian boy, and we used to try to meet in various places and for ministry. But it grew into 75 plus young people with all various kinds of ministries. And we went all over New England and as far west as Chicago with our ministry. And eventually I said, I think this young girl needs a husband.
And what did she think of that, Barbara?
It wasn't a bad idea.
That's how we met.
We've heard a few funny stories along the way from people's wedding days. Do y'all have one you want to share? Or
Oh, ours was a very small wedding. It was just a few friends, and they just had to move the furniture in the church because it was in the middle of the week of VBS.
You didn't use the sets as a prop for the
We
wedding?
didn't do anything special because Paul was bivocational, so he was a mailman, and we got married when it was his long weekend. So we got married on a Thursday night so that we could go away for his long weekend. So there was nothing really big about our wedding.
I really splurged, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Paul, speaking of you being a mailman, I've heard you talk stories about dogs
Oh, yeah.
and how they loved you.
Oh, they did indeed.
You want to share that with our viewers?
I can show you the scars in my body, which is, it's amazing what these dogs know about mailmen. And my worst experience was climbing a set of stairs, and several stairs, and I saw the German Shepherd coming running up the street, and the lady came to the screen door and said, "Oh, he's not going to bite you," and he was in the air at that time.
Is he calling you now, the dog?
I forgot that this thing is with me. It's 24/7. You want a cut?
Swipe to the left. He got a new phone because he lost his other one. Let's talk about that.
I'm
Maybe
sorry.
we don't want to
I'm sorry. Where are we going with this now? Where are we?
The dog's coming after you.
The dog was in the air.
The dog was in the air, and the lady at the screen said, "Don't worry, he's not going to bite you." And by then he had his teeth right into my arm. And she said, "Oh my goodness, get in there, get in there." So she got him into the house, and I was all shook up, and I had my satchel and trying to protect myself, and he came right out through the screen.
He liked
Again,
what he got the first time.
He really liked that, Italian blood. So I ended up going to the hospital, and they confined the dog out back on the porch, and a little-known Gazette reporter went out back to interview somebody that was coming home from the military, and he got hit by the dog. So I'm not very fond of dogs.
But they evidently like you.
Oh, they love me. That's why I ended up owning dogs.
Paul, you spoke about an Italian mailman. Was your family, how soon did your family come to the United States?
My dad came to the United States in the early 1900s. He was a teenager, and of course the war was just going to start and take place, and they offered him citizenship if he would go fight in the military. So he did, and he survived, and he came out, and that's his story. He ended up being a barber, and so I never paid for haircuts all my teenage life and beyond. So, yeah.
And did you grow up, was it an Italian neighborhood where you grew up? Or?
It was all kinds of ethnic groups. In Haverhill, Massachusetts, they had about 10 ethnic churches, all different kinds of denominations and people, ethnic groups. And so there was an Italian church, but I didn't go to it because I was raised in a cult, which ended pretty sorrowful for me. So.
Barbara, what about you? What is your family background?
My family background is just a plain background. My parents were divorced when I was very young, so I was raised with my brother by my mom, and we lived in Haverhill, which was a very interesting place to live. It was an old mill town on the Merrimack River, but all of my friends in the 60s, all of my friends were first generation. Their parents had all come over from European countries. And so it was a very interesting thing to go up to the tenements and visit with your friends, and you could have different smells and different sounds, and you heard different languages. And in Haverhill, the areas were kind of delineated by the ethnic group. You know, there would be the Lithuanian group that had their store and their church and their club, and the Italians. So I had a lot of diversity in growing up in Haverhill, and friends from all different backgrounds. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, as a young boy, I went to the Garibaldi Club,
Yeah.
which was where I learned how to play bocce.
Are you playing these days?
No, not yet.
Barbara, did you you went to college?
Yes, but I didn't go to college right after high school. I didn't go to college until after I was married and had started a family. I didn't have the opportunity back in the late 60s, but I had always wanted to be a teacher, and when things kind of settled down and most of the children were in school, I started taking courses a little bit at a time, and then finally finished up and got a bachelor's and a master's. And then I taught for about 25 years.
And what did you teach?
Mostly special ed. I did a lot with young children, and it was mostly special ed.
And Paul, did you go to Bible college?
I did. I went to, after my conversion at age 27, in Christian America was the first time I heard the gospel when I was 27 years old, and jolted me right out of my skin, and ran home and got on my knees after the crusade for Christ, and said, wow, if this is all real, and it was. And at that time, I had no Bible experience, so I went to the Boston School of the Bible, and then took several courses at Gordon Conwell Seminary, and eventually ended up getting a certificate so that I could mentor those who were getting master degrees, which gave me a great opportunity to have large staff at the church.
And would you share with us a little bit about what took you to that first time that you were introduced to Christ?
Oh my goodness. There was a time when I was maybe early 27 years old, and I felt that I was going to apply for something and that it would look great on the application that I was in a church. So that's how it all started. I didn't know the pastor of the church that I drove by every day, and I called him. I said, do you make house calls? You know, like he was a doctor, and he was, doctor of philosophy. So he came over and sat with me and talked to me about Jesus, and it was all new to me, what he was saying, and I told him that I would like to join a church. He said, well, I've got this course that you really should take from Moody Bible. And after he left, I said, my goodness, I just want to join the church, and they want me to become a theologian. So I took the course, and then he came to me and he said, there's a crusade for Christ, and the preacher's going to be Billy Graham's original partner. And they started Youth for Christ together. So he said, will you drive the bus for us to the crusade? He was out of town. And I said, oh my goodness, here we go again. I'm just trying to join the church. Now they want me to be the chauffeur. So I said, look, I'm very, very busy. I'll drive on the first night. And he said, well, that's fine. So I drove the school bus down to the crusade. And after the first night, I said, that can't be all true, what I just heard tonight. I said, I think I'll tell him I'll drive the second night if he needs anybody. I ended up driving 15 nights, and on the final night, the question was, if God called you to do something, how would you respond? So that shook me up, because, you know, if God's going to call you to do something, you better get it right. So I went forward, and a whole bunch of men laid hands on me, and that's how I received Christ, that March of 1963, and eventually applied for credentials in ministerial work and was granted that and held credentials since the mid-60s.
Barbara, do you have a story you'd like to share about your coming to faith?
When I was in the 8th grade, my mom decided that I needed to go to church so that I wouldn't be a heathen. And the only church she knew was the one up the street, the Congregational Church. So she would drop me off for Sunday school and church. And at the end of the 8th grade, every year, this church would give a banquet for the 8th graders. And of course, I went to the banquet and I heard about the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they gave an invitation. And I remember jumping up out of my seat and not even knowing why, but knowing I needed to go forward. And I gave my life to the Lord at that time. And then, of course, I was able to stay in that church and grow in my faith, and it was a really wonderful experience. And the wonderful thing about it is that even though I didn't come from a Christian home, that church was my family. And I could look at different people in the church, I could follow the women, I could watch how they interacted with their husbands, and that's where I learned so much, not only about life, but about how to live the Christian life and what it cost and what it had in value. So it was a wonderful experience.
That church was congregational, and most of the congregational churches in New England were going liberal and becoming out of the faith. And but this pastor was a conservative pastor and brought the church around from the United Church of Christ to the Congregational Christian Conference, the conservative. And so that's how I grew up in that West Congregational Church.
Barbara, a few minutes ago you talked about the children started coming. Tell us about your children.
Our children? We have 3 children. Have to stop and think, but get this right. We have 3 children, 3 adult children. 2 are adopted, and 1 is our biological. 2 boys and a girl. We have 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Well, 1 is on the way. So, but our children are spread apart. We were foster parents for many years, so we had children coming in and out of our home. Our daughter, who was adopted, was one of those foster children. And so we've had a wonderful experience of being able to share the gospel with kids as they were living with us. We have 2 girls that came to us when they were only 2 and 4 years old, 2 sisters, and we're still in touch with them. So that's nice to be able to have some connections with children that you've watched and helped and seen grow in the faith and grow in life too. So, yeah.
Do you have any idea how many foster children you fostered?
Probably about 10 altogether. Yeah.
Wow. We became foster parents in Massachusetts. You had to pass all of their requirements to become foster families. So that's how it all took place. And after nearly 40 years, I would say, that young girl, 2 and 4 years old, that were sisters, we had them for nearly 2 years. And when we had to bring them home, it was the next town down. And I remember driving home on the highway and pulling off the highway and just weeping. I couldn't contain myself. I just wept, not only because we were giving the girls up, but because of where I left them. Mm-hmm. And it was a disaster.
It's a hard ministry, but it's a worthwhile ministry. It doesn't go the way you think it should all the time,
but now after nearly 40 years, they're the ones that got in touch with us. Yeah. And that was a blessing. And one of the other blessings was that this gospel team that Barbara talked about, and which I led, had a reunion 3 years ago at Alton Bay of the young people that were involved. And this was in the 60s. We had over 50, well, I was going to say young people.
Their grandparents.
What you do as young people.
So, yeah, but they were over 50 of them, and they were involved in ministry. So they all gave testimonies, and it was just a powerful time of reunion. One of the highlights, I think, of my life was to see this take place.
I think it's very, I can't even think of the word right now. It's very fulfilling to know that when you invest in people's lives, whether it's foster children or youth group or Sunday school or whatever it is, when you're investing in people's lives and you see that investment grow and then multiply, that's a very fulfilling and rewarding thing. And it just makes it, you recognize that when you're doing it as unto the Lord and you give it to Him and He takes it and makes it even better than what you could possibly expect. It's just a wonderful thing to be able to look back as you get older and see that some of those things you did that didn't seem so important at the time turned out to be really valuable.
And they probably taught you a lot of lessons along the way.
Absolutely, sure.
We went to the most unique places to minister, because we had the gospel team did a patriotic block, and a lot of people were interested in, especially when the holidays like 4th of July, and so we had various different kinds of groups other than churches that said, we'd like you to come and do a concert. I said, well, we don't do a concert unless I can speak for about 15 minutes. Oh my, well, yeah, okay. We want the gospel team, and we'll put up with you.
And it was a problem for you to speak 15 minutes?
No problem. One time I had to ask the bartender to stop shaking the ice so that I could be heard, but we were in the most unique places.
How did you come to know about the Advent Christian Village?
Well, Paul was pastoring an Advent Christian church in Haverhill, Massachusetts in the 70s, and Pomeroy and Jerry came because of the Fifth Sunday offerings, and because we were pastoring that church, we were introduced to the village way back in the 70s, and that's when we began supporting it. At one point, we thought about maybe coming here as house parents, but that didn't work out, and that was okay. And then when we moved to Florida 2001, and Paul really wanted to come to the village then, but I had never been. And I thought, I'm still working. I want to be in a neighborhood where I see the school bus and where things are happening. I don't want to go to some old retirement place. So I held off for a few years.
Wrong.
Well, we're glad you finally decided to come, Barbara.
But when I came here, oh my, it wasn't anything like what I expected.
You mentioned Pomeroy and Jerry. Mm-hmm. You have some continuing connections with them, don't you? Why don't you share that with our viewers?
We do. Our middle son, James, is married to Laramie, and Laramie is Pomeroy's granddaughter.
And she was the pianist here in the village for several years.
She grew up here.
Mm-hmm. She grew up here, yeah.
And during our conversations, I found out that a number of people are co-grandparents. Their son or daughters, so, we have all kind of connections here at Advent Christian Village. And that's fun to know.
It is.
Barbara, I know that you have a particular talent that you have shared a few times. It involves puppets.
Oh,
Tell us about that.
That's not really. I'm not really great at it, but I enjoyed working with kids with puppets because it was a way for especially shy children or children with disabilities to be able to do something that used their talents, but they didn't have to be right out in front of people. And so we'd had a puppet ministry in several of the churches that we were at, and it was just a lot of fun, but nothing fantastic, but we enjoyed it, and I enjoyed watching the young people develop some confidence and some abilities to do things and feel good about themselves, and yet not have to be out in front of everybody. And so it was a great ministry. Puppet ministry is a fun ministry, but it's also a very important ministry for people who feel they want to do something, but feel like they have to be in front, and they don't want that.
And what's the name of your sweet little puppet?
Oh, I have one big puppet left. That's Kelly.
Kelly, yeah. And I got kind of jealous, so I got a puppet for my own ministry, and he's a motorcycle gang, and so I call him Harley.
And do they talk to one another?
Oh, yeah.
The two puppets?
They're both up on the shelf. They converse regularly.
Well, I think our time is coming to an end, but do you have anything else you'd like to share before we say tune in again next time?
Just want to say that living here at the Village is such a wonderful opportunity. It's such a wonderful place to be. And like I said, when I came here, I was totally surprised. A few years ago, when I was thinking about retiring, it was around the same time that I joined a ladies' Bible study. And as I was sitting there looking at all these women around me, I thought, here I am, old enough to collect Social Security, and I'm the baby of the group. Here are all these women in their 80s and 90s still being vibrant, still being, giving of themselves and working together and sharing and being a partnership with each other. And I'm thinking, this is not what retirement was in my mind. These people are living every single day. So the village is a wonderful place for people, no matter what their age is, because there's plenty to do, there's plenty of opportunities, and yet at the same time, it's a wonderful community environment that cares and loves each other. It's really great.
And when we give tours, I usually tell people that I'm going to spend some time with you and sharing with you as much as I can, but all that I share is only about 50% because you got to live it and experience the rest of it because it's a family.
It is.
It is definitely a family feeling. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll tune in again for a future conversation here on the Front Porch.